Okay, this is to help with the perspective drawings that were assigned. We had a U-shaped block that we asked you to do a 1, 2, and 3-point perspective of. Here I have this shape drawn with an oblique view. So the oblique pictorial starts with a front face, as if you were looking at it straight on, evidenced by horizontal and vertical lines. It's not a very realistic view. If you were truly looking at it in kind of the silhouette mapped with horizontal and vertical lines, you wouldn't actually see the top and the sides. But we draw those depth edges anyway and draw the eyes back and show it. Easy to draw, easy to understand. One thing that's not realistic about that is that in real life, when things are further away, they appear in smaller. They take up a smaller profile in our sight. So a perspective drawing is going to attempt to make things look a little more realistic by using shorter segments on items that are in the background. Okay, so 1-point perspective I'll start with, and we're just going to kind of knock these out for those that needed the help. You're going to start with the orthographic front face, so draw it nice and squared up. Horizontal lines for the widths, vertical lines for the heights. So widths are horizontal, heights are vertical. So we're using parallel lines. If we use all parallel lines, though, everything would come out to be the same length, like they did in the oblique. So the height on the back edge, which is supposed to be more in the background than this edge right here, they're physically the same length on paper. So how we're going to get that back height edge to be shorter is by using depth edges that angle or taper into a point. And we want that point to be consistent for all depth edges. I would like to show the top and the right side just like I did for that object. So to do that, I have to go above the very highest point of my front face. So I got to be above that. And then I need to be out to the right past kind of the most right edge if I want to draw the eye and show the side, the depth, okay? So exactly kind of where you put it, if you're in close, out far, it's going to skew things a little bit. So definitely something we talked about in class that you can play around and experiment with, kind of rotating that point. You can change bringing it in closer or further away, but I'm just going to stick one out there and go for it, okay? So we're going to draw, these are very light lines, so I know I got to make sure they show up on the camera, but hopefully that shows up enough. I want to do this light to emphasize, because some students make them dark, these are not supposed to be the lines or the edges of the shape right now. These are guidelines that are going to help us draw the shape. Okay, this is kind of like making my own graph paper, but I don't want this to be the prominent thing. Okay, so from all these points that I can draw to there without going inside is where I want to go. This point right here, it's going to go kind of inside and then it hits it, so I'll just stop kind of right there. Okay, hopefully you can start to see how this is almost like a shooting star. It looks like it's kind of coming out of space, out of a point and coming forward, right? So what we need to decide is what was the depth of this shape. Okay, so that is up to you, right, in your part and object and what you're trying to illustrate, but I'm going to go ahead and just establish some sort of depth with one of these. Any one of these lines is going to basically establish all of them. So I'll just make a point and say that represents on that edge where the depth was. From there, I'm going to use vertical lines and horizontal lines for anything that's not a depth edge. So a height edge is going to be vertical. Okay. And then when I get to that, when I intersect that, this is like a construction line, shows me where the depth edge from that corner was going to point. That completes that right side. Okay, so this is like the back top right corner. And now from there, I want to be horizontal. Okay, this is like the width along the back. So I want a width edge along the back. And I'm going to draw until I intersect the next construction line. And that'll establish that top back left corner. And then I can darken that segment right there. So I've just built the top of this right piece, right? And then I can see that this is going to run into that, but the back, okay, once I've established the height, that's the height for both sides, so I can actually bring this kind of as a construction line all the way across and help me see where these other two corners are. And then it just so happens that from there, it almost perfectly aligned to that. That's just based on where I put that and how deep I made it. But I will drop a segment kind of down until it intersects. It looks like that would disappear just behind this right piece. And so this would intersect somewhere kind of just back behind that. So this is just going to be a segment that stops at that line because it would disappear just behind there, right? So in essence, you don't have to draw this, but in essence, those would continue and be back behind. Okay, and then I've got these 2 points defining the back corners of the left top. So I will draw a segment connecting that from this corner to that. Notice these lines are following and they're staying on my construction lines that went to what's called the vanishing point. Right, and then I'll connect these two. And we're going to call that VP subscript D. It's a vanishing point for depth. In the end, the eyes are not supposed to be drawn to all these lines. And in fact, you can even now erase all those lines because those were just construction lines helping you construct your drawing, but that's not the drawing itself. Okay? We wanted to draw this shape using a perspective, meaning things start to appear smaller as they're further away. But we don't want to have a drawing with a bunch of lines, right? So you can fade those away. But what I'm going to be checking is, with a ruler, if I put a ruler on there, is do all of your edges point, all your depth edges, do they point to that point, okay? So I should be seeing, I guess if I'm take a time to be a little more careful, but that these lines should be on a path that would hit that vanishing point, okay? So that is a 1-point perspective. All right, now with a 2-point. All right, a 2-point perspective is going to start with a front right height edge. So thinking of this one up here, we're going to start with basically this edge right here, okay? We're going to then define a vanishing point for the width. But with the 1 point, our widths were all horizontal, how wide the object was. This time we're not going to have that where they're parallel and horizontal. So I'm going to start with simply a vertical line, okay? That is, I'll use the same height here of 4. This is like the foreground. And the orientation of the 2-point perspective is such that it's more rotated or turned, where the left edge is not supposed to be in the same distance to the eye in the foreground as the right edge. So this edge is actually going to be backwards as if this piece is rotated. Okay, which is more realistic because if you're seeing the right side, right, think if this was something with all perpendicular sides, in order to see the right side, you would have had to rotate it, and this left edge would have been further away, okay? So we start with that. Now, I do want to show the top again and the right side again. So I'm going to be above this. This is representing the height here in the foreground. I want to be higher than that and kind of far out here to the left, and I'm going to just put VPW. That means this is the vanishing point for all width edges. And then I'm going to use my ruler here and again do just light, what are called construction lines. They're going to guide me here, okay, for making this shape. That's going to guide the direction of my top edges, and this is going to guide the direction of my bottom edges. Now along this, right, these 3 points basically represent a vertical plane in space, and I have to decide how wide my shape is. So that's kind of arbitrary for what I'm trying to draw, but I'm going to go ahead and set a line segment here with a specific length, right? And that's going to visually establish the width of the front face. And so from there, I'm going to be vertical. My heights in a 2-point perspective remain vertical. So widths are no longer parallel. They're going to go to a vanishing point for widths. Heights are all going to be vertical, thus they're all going to be parallel. Okay? Now, in trying to make the top piece here, I know that things in the foreground are supposed to appear bigger and use longer segments. So I want to be careful that, if this shape you kind of thought of maybe it was in thirds, that I don't want to kind of evenly space these 3 gaps. So I would like to illustrate this in a way that it appears that the segments, if they were all supposed to be equal in width, they actually get a little bit shorter as I go back. So I'll allow myself to use the longest length here in the foreground, use a little bit shorter length. This is just me kind of trying to illustrate. I could be counting squares and being a little more careful, but and then letting maybe this segment from here to here be shorter, hopefully, than this. Okay. All right, from there, I'll kind of establish where my endpoints are, and then I need height edges, right? So the height edges are going to drop straight down, but now the question is where? Well, when I drew this first one, which I'm trying to recreate, I had this exactly at half the height of the overall. So in the foreground here, I can establish where half height is, and then I can make a construction line that guides any width at half the height up of where that is. So I'll bring my heights down to that line intersection, and that will establish those edges for the front face. Okay, so notice I'm getting this entire front face with just the width vanishing point. Okay, so I said start with front right height edge, define the vanishing point for width. I did draw front face on plane to width. So on that plane, I'm using the height still to be vertical. You may need to add another construction line towards that width along the way. After that, we're ready to basically extrude and make this face become three-dimensional. But we're going to do it with a vanishing point. So we're going to have a second vanishing point, kind of like we did the first drawing where we had a one-point perspective. So you can play around with kind of where that is, what angle you put it at, how far, how close. I'm just going to kind of stick it way out there. And I'm going to grab these corners and just start giving myself very light, faint lines, just like I did with the one-point perspective. And these lines are going to guide my all my depth. Every depth edge I draw will be on one of these construction lines, okay? But I'm keeping those very faint and light. So now I have to establish, and I'll probably do it in the foreground, what is the depth of this block, okay? So this is me kind of artistically deciding how deep I want it to look. And from there, just like I did with the one-point perspective, I'm now going to make a height edge that goes up to the next construction line. Where that intersects that next construction line, I can see this depth edge and that height edge where they're supposed to meet. So I can darken those in. And then on this shape, this is really nice. So from this right back corner, okay, this shape is supposed to have the same depth physically everywhere. So I'm going to do one construction line from that point over to my width. This is kind of going across the back edge, right, from the right side to the left side. This is going to guide both back edges on top of both pieces. Okay, so then I just have to see where did the depth construction line from this corner go, and where does it meet that width one, and that establishes the correct vertex corner for that top, okay? And then I can see where from this corner I had a depth going back where it meets that same construction line, which was going to the width, right? So going across the back where that meets going towards the depth. And so that establishes that corner. And then this width line, same width line, is going to the next depth construction line where they meet establishes the top of the left. Okay. Now from here, I just need a height that goes straight down. It's pretty close. And I can see where it's going to connect with this. And then that really would have a very, it's so small, but maybe I just barely would start to see an edge that's back there. That, in theory, should point to that. It's just so small, I don't think you would be able to tell where it's pointing. Okay? All right, so I'm going to be a little faster for a 3-point, but I'll do a 3-point as well. With the 3-point, the only thing that changes, it's going to feel a lot like doing the 2-point, is that when I do these height edges, I'm no longer vertical. So every single line segment I'm going to draw has to point to a vanishing point. So you'll see me make the first one vertical. I'll establish a width, but when I get to do the second one, it can't be parallel to the first one. This one can be vertical as long as the vanishing point that it's pointing towards then is on that line. But the next one, because it's over here to the left, it has to angle itself to point at the vanishing point. Okay. So here's my 3-point. I'm going to start in the foreground with a height edge of the same size that I did with the other ones. I'm going to go above that. I need, because I want to show the top, so I'm making sure I'm above the highest point and kind of over here to the left. And that width, that's going to be my vanishing point to establish the width, how wide this U-shaped face is. Okay? And so this feels just like a 2-point. I'm going to pick along here where to put a point that establishes the width. Okay? Forgive me for maybe not using a ruler everywhere. I'm trying to be fast. Up until here, everything's been the same. But this will be the first point and line segment I draw that's going to be slightly different for a 3-point. So this height edge has to be angled towards another vanishing point. This vanishing point is going to be for my height edges, where that one was for any width edge. Okay, so when I get to the left side of this U face, and my tendency is to want to draw a vertical line opposite that like I've been doing, we're not going to do that. Okay, we are going to use the vanishing point for height in my ruler, and I'm going to angle the ruler from that point to the end point of the left bottom. I will then draw a construction line, so a light thin line to guide me past that point all the way up higher than that with construction line, and that will show me where the top left corner of the front face should go. And so that's that. Now, this construction line shows me the top of my front face, and I've got to basically decide how long I want the right side of the front face to be relative to the left side. But remember, the left side is supposed to appear further away, so even though they're physically in the real world the same distance, I want to use a smaller segment here than I use here. And if that gap in here was supposed to be the same distance as those, then I want that gap to be slightly smaller than this, right? So I'm trying to eyeball and think about how far I would go to get this to be slightly longer than the gap and that to be shorter, okay? So I'm just kind of artistically trying to decide that on the fly for this time. Now, I want to make that little cutout, right? Well, with a 2-point, we were just vertical, vertical. This is where it's different. We're not going to be vertical. Plus, that would almost look weird here. You can see it cuts in. And we're not parallel to these heights because they're not parallel. We are now going to angle towards our vanishing point. So from the top of that, make little construction lines towards your vanishing point for height, and that's going to guide those height edges. Now, how far down do you go? Well, we wanted that to be halfway, so use the midpoint in the foreground to establish the height that's half, and then go towards your width vanishing point, and you will get those construction lines to intersect, showing you exactly where that notch goes. Okay? Like that. So there is our front face of our 3-point perspective. We've only used 2 vanishing points though. Right? One for the widths and one for the heights, because that's all we've got on the front face is width and height. Now that we're going to make it 3D and kind of extrude it, we're going to come somewhere over here and draw the eye back here for depth. Okay? And so this starts to feel very familiar to the other ones, right? Once you've done the 1 and the 2-point and you've been using these vanishing points for depth each time, this feels very similar. However, as we walk our way around the back edge, we have to keep in mind if we're drawing a height or a width, and we have to keep using these along the way, not just horizontal and verticals. All right, so I'm going to establish on one of these lines, it doesn't matter which one, a line that represents how deep I wanted the object to be. So I'm just going to set that right there, right? So that's pointing there. The next edge from that corner, that bottom right edge, would be a height edge, right, going up. And my tendency that I see from students is to just go vertical again. Nope, we're no longer using vertical horizontal lines. We're always angling towards a point. So where I want to draw height, I have to use the height vanishing point, and I'm going to put my pencil on it, use my ruler, angle towards that corner, and then just run that construction line all the way up until it intersects the next construction line coming from the top right corner. And so that shows us where to put the right face. Okay? Now, for this shape, from that corner, that back right corner, we can go across the entire back, which represents going across the width. We're going to just angle towards, we don't do it parallel, we angle towards the vanishing point. So I get my pencil on this point, I aim there, and I make this light line, and that really for me establishes where the top of the right side is. I get that depth construction line with this width one, and then because it's supposed to be the same depth on the left side, I've got that same edge here, and I get those 2 intersections right there. So that's the depth going back to the same width line. Okay, and then I want to figure out this area where you would have a vertical face meeting a horizontal. So from that corner on the top, on the back of that left piece, I would have a height edge, right? Well, I don't just draw it in. I use my ruler, And remember, I angle, if it's a height edge, I angle towards this vanishing point. And if it goes across, I can kind of stop drawing it really because it'd be behind something. All right, so that's the angle it's going, and it looks like it's going to disappear just behind the corner. That's kind of based on where I put those. But it would meet a line that's coming from here, and I don't just draw that and connect them anywhere. Maybe those would meet visibly, but maybe this one goes and disappears behind there too. What I would do is I would use my ruler and my vanishing point, and I'd get the correct angle of where that's going to go. And it looks like it just, maybe the intersection of that vertical line and this depth line would kind of happen just behind that corner. So this is going to maybe run into that line, and that kind of just disappears behind that as well. But every single edge, the test now, if I put the ruler on a line, every single edge points to one of these three. So all of my heights point here, all of my depths are pointing there, and all of my width edges, right, no matter what width edge you put the ruler on, points there. That's your 3 point.